You wake up on a quiet Saturday morning. You're planning to make coffee, maybe sit outside, enjoy your yard, the yard you've been pouring every spare dollar and every spare weekend into. You pull back the curtain, and there it is, a massive white tent, tables with white tablecloths, floral centerpieces, a catering van, 15 workers rushing around setting up chairs and ribbons, a full wedding, in your backyard, without a single word to you. This is that story. And it does not end the way Karen expected. Real stories, real justice, real moments where the most satisfying thing in the world happens. The bully loses. We post stories like this every single week. HOA nightmares, neighbor revenge, workplace justice, the kind of content that makes you pump your fist at the screen. Hit subscribe. Ring the bell. Don't miss the next one. Do it now, not after the story. Because by the end, you're going to want to share this, and you'll want to already be subscribed so you don't have to go looking for us again. Some houses don't just look like a home. They feel like one. The moment I walked through the front door for the first time, I knew it was a fixer-upper, cracked walls, peeling paint, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 80s. The kind of place most people would walk away from. I walked toward it, not because I was naive. I knew it would take work, serious work, real money, real time. But there was something about it that no staged, renovated, move-in ready house had ever given me. Potential. And the backyard sealed the deal. It was enormous. Overgrown. Yes, grass too tall. Weeds everywhere. An old shed rotting in the far corner. But underneath all of that neglect was space. Real, generous, private space. I stood in the middle of it on the day of the viewing and just looked around. I could already see it. A gazebo in the left corner. A fire pit with stone seating in the center. A small pond near the back fence, maybe with some lily pads, a little fountain. String lights hanging overhead. My sanctuary. My private escape from the world. I signed the papers 2 weeks later. The HOA welcome packet arrived the day after closing. I skimmed it. Typical neighborhood rules. Keep the lawn tidy. Don't paint your house neon green. No commercial vehicles parked out front. Normal stuff. And then she showed up. Karen. She arrived on my doorstep 3 days after I moved in, holding a small basket of muffins, wearing a smile that was warm on the surface but calculating underneath. Welcome to the neighborhood, she said. I'm the HOA president. If you ever need anything at all, just let me know. She said all the right things. But the way her eyes moved, past me, over my shoulder, scanning the hallway, the living room, the boxes stacked everywhere. It wasn't friendly curiosity. It was assessment. She was deciding whether my house met her standards. I thanked her for the muffins, told her renovation was underway, and closed the door. The visits started the following week. First, once a week, a casual stroll past the house with polite comment. Then twice a week. Then nearly every other day. The grass is looking a little long again. Are those tools going to be outside permanently? The paint on the shutters. Do you have the approved color palette? The HOA has specific guidelines. Every time, I explained patiently. Major renovation in progress. Give it a few more weeks. It will look great when it's done. Karen would nod, smile, and the smile said everything her words didn't. She didn't see my house as my home. She saw it as an eyesore in her perfect little neighborhood, a problem that needed to be managed. I kept my head down and kept working. Weekends, early mornings, late nights, the house slowly, steadily transformed. I had no idea what was coming. I had been looking forward to that Saturday for 2 weeks. It was the first weekend in a long time where I had nothing scheduled. No deliveries. No contractors, no errands, just a slow morning, a cup of coffee, and maybe a few hours of planning out the gazebo design. I went to sleep Friday night, genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. Then the sound started. Low at first, a distant rumbling, some muffled voices. I pulled my pillow over my head and told myself it was just early morning traffic. Then a truck engine, much closer. Then another voice, sharp, directing, calling out instructions. Over here. No, left. Move those chairs to the center first. I sat up. Something was wrong. I got out of bed, walked to the window that overlooked the backyard, and pulled back the curtain. I stood there for a full 10 seconds without moving. A massive white tent was being erected in the center of my backyard. Workers in matching uniforms were carrying chairs in from a truck parked on the side of my house. A catering van was parked behind them. Tables were being unfolded, tablecloths spread, floral centerpieces placed with precision. Someone was setting up a wedding in my backyard. Right now, I didn't even fully process it at first. My brain kept trying to find an explanation. Maybe they had the wrong address. Maybe this was some kind of elaborate mistake. Maybe I was still half asleep. I threw on the first clothes I could find and went outside. The scale of it hit me harder up close. It wasn't just a tent and some chairs. This was a full, professional wedding setup. I counted at least 15 workers. There were tall floral arrangements, a makeshift aisle with rose petals being carefully placed, a table being set up that was clearly meant for a wedding cake. And in the middle of all of it, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, wearing a blazer on a Saturday morning like she owned the place, stood Karen. She was directing the entire operation like a 4-star general, barking instructions, checking her clipboard, waving workers to different positions. She was completely in her element. When she saw me walking toward her, she smiled. Not a warm smile, not an apologetic smile. The smile of someone who had already won. "Isn't it just wonderful?" she said, gesturing around like she was showing me a gift. The bride's parents are close friends of mine. They had a venue fall through at the last minute, and I knew, once everything was dressed up properly, that your yard would be absolutely perfect. I stared at her. "You set up a wedding in my yard," I said slowly, making sure each word was clear. Without asking me, without my permission, she waved her hand, a dismissive little flick that I felt in my chest. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just one day. Think of it as your contribution to the community." I took a breath. "This is my private property. You need to have everything removed. Right now." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone, like she was letting me in on a secret. "Actually," she said, "the HOA bylaws give us authority to use community spaces for community events, so we're completely within our rights." "Community spaces?" I repeated, "This is my backyard." She shrugged, actually shrugged. It wasn't being used. It was just sitting there. "If anything, we're improving it for you." That was the moment something snapped inside me. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The complete disregard for my rights as a homeowner. The casual dismissal of everything I had worked for. I told them they had 1 hour to pack everything up and leave my property. Karen laughed. Literally laughed. The bride's father came over moments later. A tall man in press slacks, clearly trying to play the role of reasonable adult. He offered me a few $100s for the inconvenience. A few $100s to trespass on my land, take over my private space, and treat me like an obstacle in my own home. I told him exactly what he could do with his offer. The situation was escalating. They weren't leaving. And Karen's expression had settled into something smug and permanent. The look of someone who was absolutely certain they had already won. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They were professional, calm, and thorough. They listened to me. They listened to Karen. They looked at the setup. And then they told me something that made my stomach drop. "Sir, because the HOA is citing their bylaws as giving them authority to be here, this is technically a civil matter. We can't physically remove them without a court order." Civil matter. Court order. I looked at the clock mentally. The wedding was supposed to start in a few hours. A court order would take days at minimum. A lawyer consultation alone would take hours. And even then, by the time any legal action could be initiated, the wedding would be over. The tent would be down, and Karen would be standing in her driveway with a glass of wine, wearing that smile. She had planned this perfectly. She knew the legal system moved slowly. She knew I'd be stuck. The officers were apologetic. They advised me to document everything, consult a lawyer, and file a civil complaint. They gave me a case number and left. I stood in my driveway and watched them drive away. From across the yard, I could feel it without even looking. Karen's satisfaction. The quiet triumph of someone who had calculated every angle and found no way out for me. She was untouchable. And she knew it. I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table. The sound from outside continued. Workers talking, chairs scraping, someone testing a microphone. My home had been taken from me, and there was apparently nothing I could do about it. I sat there for a long moment, and then my eyes drifted to the corner of the kitchen counter where a folder was sitting. A folder with a contract, a receipt, and a permit. The demolition was scheduled for the following week. I had an old, dilapidated shed in the far corner of the yard, rotting wood, caved-in roof, completely beyond saving. I'd already hired a demolition company, signed a contract, paid a deposit, and pulled the permit. The permit was valid. The contract was binding. The work was completely authorized. And the owner of the demolition company was a guy named Gus. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. "Gus," I said, "I need to talk to you about the shed job. Something's come up." I explained the whole situation. The wedding setup. Karen, the HOA bylaws claim. The police saying it was a civil matter. The bride's father offered me pocket change. All of it. There was a pause when I finished. A long, slow pause. Then Gus said quietly, "You serious right now?" "Completely serious." I said, "I have the permit. I have the signed contract. It's my property. How fast can you get your crew and the excavator over here?" Another pause. Then I heard it. A slow chuckle building into a full laugh. "Brother," Gus said, "I've had my own run-ins with HOAs. 2 of them. And I have been waiting years for a call like this." He told me he'd pull his crew off the job they were currently on. He'd have the excavator loaded onto the flatbed and be at my place in under an hour. He had one condition. "I want to be there when it happens. I want to watch. Front row seat." I told him, "I'll make coffee." That hour was the longest of my life. I watched from my window as the wedding setup was completed. More guests were starting to arrive, dressed up, happy, excited, completely unaware of what was about to roll down the street. The bride and groom arrived together in a decorated car. They were glowing, genuinely happy, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Then I remembered Karen's dismissive hand wave, her laugh when I asked them to leave, the bride's father offering me hush money, the police driving away, the satisfied smirk on Karen's face. The guilt passed quickly. 53 minutes after my call with Gus, the ground shook, not metaphorically, literally. A deep, low rumble, the kind you feel in your chest before you hear with your ears, rolled down the street. The wedding music dipped. Guests turned their heads. Conversations faltered. Then it came around the corner. A massive orange and white flatbed truck, moving slowly and deliberately down my residential street. And riding on the back of it, gleaming in the morning sun, was a bright yellow excavator. It was enormous. It was loud. It was perfect. Gus and his crew were all in high-visibility vests and hard hats. Completely professional, completely by the book. They parked the flatbed on the street in front of my house, and the crew began unloading the machine with the calm efficiency of people who do this every day. The wedding guests had stopped pretending not to stare. The music had stopped entirely. Everyone was watching. And then Karen came. Of course she did. She came across the yard at a speed I hadn't seen from her before. Clipboard clutched her chest, face cycling through shock, confusion, and fury in real time. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, planting herself in front of me. "You cannot do this. There is a wedding happening on this property." I calmly pulled out my phone and opened the folder I had prepared. Permit, signed contract, company license, property deed. "I have a valid demolition permit for the shed on this property," I said. "This is my private property. Your event is trespassing. I strongly suggest everyone moves to a safe distance." Karen stared at the documents. Something shifted in her expression. The first crack in that bulletproof confidence. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. I turned to Gus. He nodded, climbed up into the excavator's cab. The engine turned over with a roar that drowned out everything else on the street. It wasn't just loud, it was a force, a physical presence. The kind of sound that makes your body understand instinctively that something massive and powerful is very close to you. The wedding guests took a collective step back. Gus maneuvered the machine slowly, Carefully, a genuinely skilled operator. Directly through the center of the party setup. Tables rolled aside. Ribbons tore. A floral arrangement toppled over in the breeze of the machine's movement. He wasn't destroying anything deliberately. He was simply operating legally authorized heavy machinery on private property that he had a contract and permit to work on. The message, however, was impossible to misread. He parked the excavator directly beside the old shed, the giant hydraulic claw hovering just above it. He looked down from the cab, found my eyes in the crowd, and gave me a single, slow nod. My cue. Boom. The guests in their finest clothes. Karen, pale now, clipboard hanging loosely at her side. The bride's father, standing very still. I spoke clearly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for this interruption. I let that land for a second. Then, unfortunately, you are currently trespassing on private property. The HOA president scheduled this event on my land without my knowledge or consent. I have a valid permit to conduct demolition work on this property today. You have 5 minutes to evacuate safely before work begins. Please gather your belongings and leave the premises immediately. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the yard exploded into chaos. Guests grabbed bags and jackets and started moving fast. High heels sank into the grass. Someone knocked over a chair. 2 women were clutching each other's arms as they rushed toward the gate. The bride had her hands over her mouth. Her eyes were filling with tears, not the happy kind. The groom had his arm around her, looking from her to me to Karen with an expression that was moving rapidly from confusion to understanding to anger. And the bride's father, the man who had offered me money, turned to Karen. What he said to her, I won't repeat in full, but it was loud, it was pointed, and several guests stopped their own panicked evacuation to witness it. Karen, for the first time since I had known her, had nothing to say. She stood there, clipboard in one hand, everything she had built in this neighborhood crumbling in real time, and she just stood there. 8 minutes after my announcement, the yard was empty. No guests, no wedding party, no catering staff. Just scattered chairs, a half-built centerpiece on a crooked table, and the echo of high heels on pavement fading into the distance. It was just me, Gus, and his crew. Gus leaned out of the cab and looked at me. Ready to finish the job? Please, I said. He brought the claw down. The shed exploded into splinters. The sound of it, that clean, satisfying crack and crumble, echoed off the back fence and rang across the empty yard. It was, without question, the most satisfying sound I've ever heard in my life. Boom! The guests in their finest clothes. Karen, pale now, clipboard hanging loosely at her side. The bride's father, standing very still. I spoke clearly and loudly enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for this interruption. I let that land for a second. Then, unfortunately, you are currently trespassing on private property. The HOA president scheduled this event on my land without my knowledge or consent. I have a valid permit to conduct demolition work on this property today. You have 5 minutes to evacuate safely before work begins. Please gather your belongings and leave the premises immediately. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then the yard exploded into chaos. Guests grabbed bags and jackets and started moving fast. High heels sank into the grass. Someone knocked over a chair. 2 women were clutching each other's arms as they rushed toward the gate. The bride had her hands over her mouth. Her eyes were filling with tears, not the happy kind. The groom had his arm around her, looking from her to me to Karen with an expression that was moving rapidly from confusion to understanding to anger. And the bride's father, the man who had offered me money, turned to Karen. What he said to her, I won't repeat in full, but it was loud, it was pointed, and several guests stopped their own panicked evacuation to witness it. Karen, for the first time since I had known her, had nothing to say. She stood there, clipboard in one hand, everything she had built in this neighborhood crumbling in real time, and she just stood there. 8 minutes after my announcement, the yard was empty. No guests, no wedding party, no catering staff. Just scattered chairs, a half-built centerpiece on a crooked table, and and the echo of high heels on pavement fading into the distance. It was just me, Gus, and his crew. Gus leaned out of the cab and looked at me. Ready to finish the job? Please, I said. He brought the claw down. The shed exploded into splinters. The sound of it, that clean, satisfying crack and crumble, echoed off the back fence and rang across the empty yard. It was, without question, the most satisfying sound I've ever heard in my life. Let me be honest about something. This story isn't really about revenge. It isn't really about an excavator or a shed, or even Karen specifically. It's about a moment that most of us have faced, in different forms at different scales, where someone with perceived authority tells you that your rights don't matter, and the system backs them up, and every official channel leads to a dead end. The police say it's a civil matter. The lawyer says it'll take weeks. The deadline passes. The damage is done. And the question is, what do you do in that gap? What I did was look at what I already had. Not what I wished I had. Not what I'd have in a perfect world. What was already in my hands. A signed contract. A valid permit. A demolition company owner with a grudge against HOAs and a great sense of humor. I used the tools available to me. Legally. Transparently. Publicly. And I want to be clear about this because it matters. I didn't damage the wedding setup. Gus didn't destroy anything that belonged to the guests or the bride's family. The machine moved through carefully. The shed, my property, permitted for demolition, was the only thing that came down. Everything was done by the book. That's what made it bulletproof. Karen lost not because I was louder or angrier than her. She lost because when it came to a test of who actually had legal standing, who actually had documentation, who actually had rights, I did. She had a clipboard and an attitude. I had a permit and a Gus. There's a lesson in that. Know your rights. Document everything. And when you're pushed into a corner, don't panic. Look carefully at what you already have. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply use your legitimate authority with total, calm confidence. And occasionally, very occasionally, that authority comes mounted on a flatbed truck and painted bright yellow. If you made it this far, thank you. I wrote this out in full detail because I wanted you to feel every part of it. The frustration, the helplessness, the moment of clarity, the rumble of that engine, and that final glorious crack when the shed came down. If you have an HOA horror story or any story where you finally fought back, drop in the comments. I read every single one. Like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you know someone dealing with a Karen right now, send them this story. Sometimes people just need to know. There's always a Gus out there.